Fantastic. All right, I will share my screen. I think I'll share my screen. Okay, we're sharing. Can we see my screen?
Yep.
Yep. Good.
Okay, that's a summertime shot of Boulder, Colorado. But it looks like that now, except it's not as green. It's certainly as snowy right now as this picture is. But that's a group of guys on a trail, obviously below the Flatirons. That's where I run a lot. I've lived here since the early 90s and have kind of reinvented my running. I was a long time ago, I was a high school and college track and field runner. I loved all that. I lived in Chicago. I was running a bunch of 5Ks on the road and kind of got burned out. Moved west to Boulder and was ready to give up running, and yet came to Boulder and it was renewed in a fun way, and largely because of the trails. So let's see here. I'm not being able to change. Okay, there we go. All right, a little bit about me. I've been a journalist all my life. I started newspaper journalism, hard news, reported on a lot of crazy, really hard news, deaths and murders and bank scandals and stuff like that. When I moved to Boulder, I was more focused on sport and running eventually. Got into that in a lot of ways, which was a lot of fun. Boulder obviously was and still is a place for a lot of athletes, so it was easy to get a lot of stories. And then as a freelance writer, pitched those, and certainly I worked for other newspapers and magazines. Eventually started Trail Runner magazine here, and kind of that coincided with my trail running passion. Along those lines, I've been running road and track ever since. I've run a bunch of road marathons. I've run the track still, age group meets here, community meets. I've also, the picture right there is me burro racing. It's a long time passion in Colorado of donkey racing. It started with the miners, and those races are crazy. Basically trail races anywhere from as short as 4 to 5 miles and as long as 29 miles. And you're only as good as your burro is as a runner. So the other picture there, obviously me running in the Great Wall of China Marathon, which
Wow.
is a crazy, crazy event. There's two different events, and I'm not actually sure which one I did because I go to the site and I can't figure out which one it was. But basically, they're both similar, and they both run on the wall and off the wall, and then there's trail sections, and it's 26 miles, but it runs like an ultra. I think I was in the top 25%. I was like a 5 hour finisher. And super steep climbs. You can see from the background where the runners are coming down that behind me. Super steep climbs, but it's a crazy adventure. There was one point I kind of tripped and fell and almost fell over the wall. And I thought like if I and it was like a 6 story drop, and I was like, they won't find me for months, right? And so I've certainly done a lot of cool things and fun adventures. Still like kind of along the way monitoring what my times are for this or that, and kind of. But it's been a fun mix, and so here's more of what I've done. Books and writing and such, and all along it's given me insights into kind of running shoes. My real background as a kid, I was one of those. I kind of knew like some kids like a certain baseball bat or baseball glove or whatever sport you're in, right? You have a affinity for something. I just kind of sensed when I got my first pair of Adidas Oregons back in, gosh, like 1982 or 83. I felt I could feel a connection. I could feel why they were better. They were lighter. They had better grip for the cross country surfaces, and so from that point on, I became a running shoe geek, and I didn't even know why. I've actually never worked in a running store. I'm a big fan of running stores. I like to go, shoe wall browsing all the time and have forever. But I just really appreciated the kind of what running shoes are, what the better ones were, what the ones that were, not so good. So that's kind of my background, and it led me to all this stuff here. So let's see, how can I change? Okay, there we go. All right, so backing up. So people ask me like, "Oh, what were the first running shoes?" And like, humans have been running, depending on the civilization for obviously eons, right? And so, organized track and field probably has a history in the late 19th century. A lot of those were like leather shoes, and that obviously the chariots of fire era, all that stuff. I mean, my dad actually ran. He said he ran track and field when in high school, way back when, and he had leather shoes with spikes in them. So I kind of pointed this shoe, the New Balance Trackster, as one of the first really kind of shoes with a rubber outsole. It doesn't really have a midsole. I think it's a little bit of a cork heel piece in there, but certainly as a leather shoe, it's not light, but it had intentions of being a running shoe, and so. I kind of point to this. This is 1960. Obviously, the running boom hadn't really started. It did eventually start. You can point to back to Frank Shorter in the '72 Olympics, things like that. And but since then is when the running shoe industry really took off. And so a lot of specialization and modernization. You can look to the founding of Nike after being connected with ASICS all those years ago. A lot of history there. This is another shoe I like to show because obviously we talk about technology and modern stuff, and this is the Air Tailwind, which was Nike's first air sole shoe. It launched, and it actually is decrepit as this looks. This was a photograph I took of a shoe, this shoe in 2018, I think. So they didn't last long. Obviously, a lot of things dried out, and modern materials are hopefully better than that. But even when Nike launched the shoe, it had problems with the air soles popping or the midsoles not containing it well enough, and so that's kind of a undercurrent to all the modern technology of shoes. Right? We're always trying to push forward different technology and such, and so this is kind of an interesting thing. And this is obviously not modern; it's ancient as well, but certainly. Certainly, we've seen a lot of things through the years. Let's see here, change page. Okay, so obviously this box of shoes is, if you've been running for a long time, you might recognize some of those. I think there's a Nike Spiridon in there. There's a Asics Jayhawk. There's a lot of different ones in there. But basically, shoes back then, 60s, 70s, 80s were certainly EVA midsoles. Ethyl vinyl acetate, which was, had some ability to rebound, but it wasn't very long lasting. If it was in the sun too long or in the cold too long, it would affect the performance. But nylon, suede, canvas uppers were basic materials we had back then, and fairly light, but not that light. But the big thing is, materials weren't very durable over time. I mean, I remember running shoes and literally running the soles off my shoes. And they weren't really performance oriented. We think they were, but they weren't. Like if you look at what Derek Clayton ran the world record in back in the late '60s, or Steve Jones even in like 1984, it was basically the same shoe, a low level piece of EVA. And there wasn't much propulsion or return. There was some cushioning, but not much. Back then there was little gait or biomechanical science at all. I mean, brands were making shoes, and there wasn't much science like that available. There was, and it's still probably in its infancy to understand how runners move and people move. But it was, obviously they were creating products, right? There was a boom in anything, especially in this country. There's a boom in something, and people make it better, different, and sell more, right? And so, cell phones, cars, whatever it is. But I was running shoes in the 1970s. With that first big running boom. And this is where I kind of came in, like by the 1990s and early 2000s, when I was a kid before that when I was running, and I liked shoes, but like what I really started to notice was that a lot of shoes were being made to be sold, right? Better step-in feel was a big thing. Visible technology, the air insoles you could see, or the Asics gels, you could see the thing, sticking to the side of the thing, and like it was made to be sold, and yet they were getting heavier by default with more stuff on it, more things, special buzzes and whistles, but basically just like to create something to sell, because there were a lot of people running or buying running shoes, but performance had kind of been lost, except for in the very top tier of racing flats and racing spikes. But in about the 2004, 5, 6 era, there's a lot of change starting to happen. The first one probably was Nike did its barefoot study, and they came out with the Nike Free line, which is a very soft, malleable, flexible shoe that really kind of changed the game based on what they believed was a more efficient way to run, right? And so at the same time, if you've been running at all, or maybe if you haven't, you're aware of the five fingers craze and the minimalist craze, and shoes were going down to the ground, right? Same time Born to Run came out. Dr. Lieberman from Harvard released a study and showed that humans actually were efficient to run, very, very efficient running barefoot. And so all that kind of led to, with the internet and at that point in time, society changed, and instead of really leaning on experts, it was more like them finding out what they wanted to do on their own, right? So the internet, you could Google a WebMD and find out why you had a runny nose, right? And so that all changed, and it certainly led to changes in the industry and in the sport and things. Let me change here. And obviously then we had these modern shoes, and I kind of point, my first one of my slides had said, shoes have evolved since 2009, 2010. That's really the time when it really started to happen. Born to Run came out in 2009, and I know Chris McDougall's a great author and it was a great book, and yet he admits there was a lot of hyperbole in that book. But the point is, people started reading that and understanding kind of how they run, thinking about how they run, their form. It certainly led to the bigger barefoot craze, more minimalist shoes. That's when the five fingers really blew up. And then at the same time, two of my friends that used to work for Solomon, Nico Mermoud and Nicholas, I can't think of his last name, basically started Hoka. And they showed me these shoes, and I was already in the running media space, and they showed me these shoes. And I'm like, no way, no way, right? And so, literally, Nicholas is in Boulder, and he said, "Let's go for a trail run." And put on the shoe, the Hoka Mafate there, and we want to run. I'm like, "Oh my God, that feels so good!" It was just, certainly more foam, contrary to what was happening in the industry. Everything I was testing was very minimal on the ground, and this was, a very light for its size. And pretty cushy, right? It wasn't actually a spectacular foam. It's just there was more of it, right? And they were the first brand for a long time. And I would say this is the beginning of maximalism. But if you look at the Nike Air Max of 1987, that was a pretty chunky shoe as well. But obviously, this is Hoka brought it back, right? So at that point, there was also kind of a new developments in a lot of material science. And the shoe on the right there, the Adidas Energy Boost, was the kind of the first shoe to have like what I would consider a modern foam. Up until this point, we mostly had EVA blends or EVA. Even the Hoka was an EVA blend. Some brands use TPU, which was bouncier to some extent, but also heavier too. So the Adidas Energy Boost, the Boost foam was kind of that first next gen foam, which was an eTPU, basically expanded little pellets of TPU that then were then fused together. I think it was created by BASF, and it created a really bouncy feeling, different than anything else that we've ever had before. And yet it was slightly heavier, so they were working on the depth of the foam, the height of the midsole, and you can see there it's obviously lower than the Hokas that were coming out even before that. But that shoe did set, or a version of that shoe did set a world record in 2013 with some of the Adidas sponsored runners. So it certainly worked. At the same time, Nike was working with its new foams, and then Nike secretly came out with obviously their carbon plated technology. Carbon plates had been tried in shoes since the early 90s, but no one really understood kind of how they could work. And it's part because if you've read much about this, it's the foam that is the secret sauce of those shoes. The plate is kind of the activator, right? So back when they first started putting plates in shoes, I think Reebok tried it. A couple other brands tried it. They didn't really have that platform to bounce off, right? So Nike had this really kind of next gen foam. I think it came from a company called Zote Foams, which was a foam material that they found in car bumpers, things like that. And they put these two together, and very quietly and very secretly, they developed what they thought was like a super next gen shoe. And at the 2016 U.S. Olympic Trials Marathon in Los Angeles, they had several of their athletes in this shoe, and they ran in the shoe. At the same time, they had other shoes. Certain athletes didn't want to run in it or weren't running in it, but the shoes looked identical. So basically hiding in plain sight, right? And so that kind of secrecy led to the Olympics, and several Nike athletes at the 2016 Olympics in Rio had a more updated version of that, and wound up actually I think they swept the medals that year. And so that created this whole controversy, which we all know about super shoes, right? Super shoes kind of came out secretly. Nike was first at it. Hoka had one quickly after that wasn't quite as responsive, if only because they didn't have that foam, right? So, and then we fast track into the pandemic with people kind of upset about Nike having these shoes, and is it mechanical doping, things like that, and eventually what kind of settled it is World Athletics came out with regulations to hopefully make a fair playing field. Now, you can all have your own opinions about that. I have a lot of old school runner friends who will complain that, like, look, my shoes back in the 70s and 80s weren't that fast and bouncy. And obviously the modern runners who are running really fast times are certainly getting an advantage. But that's kind of how that happened. And, personally, I think there's been evolution of all sports gear through time. And these are the latest. The key is for me is you've got to have a level playing field. You can't have one athlete or one brand taking advantage. So anyway, fast forward to right now, this is kind of a cool shoe. The light spray on the right there. Um, Helen Obiri is an On sponsored athlete that wore a version of the shoe in the Boston Marathon, New York City Marathon, and basically it's a shoe that's has a spray technology where they basically create these uppers that are super lightweight, and they it's kind of a form fitting, almost like glove like feel. And up until now, this technology has only been made in small one-off cases for athletes based on their specific foot size and shape. And but now they just actually debuted, I think this past week in South Korea, this new factory where they're going to actually mass produce these shoes. So it'll be interesting to see if it's the same, certainly result and fit that the elite athletes have had. So anyway, the point of all that is like, obviously we've come a long way with shoe technology based on designs, based on materials and such. Okay, next page here. Okay, so how does that apply to all of us? And I always say, I've been saying for years, it's always important to have a quiver of shoes, and it's not because I want you to buy more shoes. I don't have any dog in the fight with that. I certainly have benefited my career, my running career, which I'm a very average runner. But like knowing that like there's a specific shoe for a specific type of run, type of workout, type of trail, things like that, and also there's plenty of other reasons. Number one is injuries, right? So people ask me about running injuries. I have no medical training. I have a lot of friends who are doctors and PTs. I've seen a lot of PTs. I've had a lot of injuries, but obviously all those injuries listed there, those are common overuse injuries. We're not talking about trauma injuries like sprained ankles. That could be a whole different discussion, but all of these things are some of the common overuse injuries that do come from running, right? And people ask, well, is running not healthy, or do shoes cause injuries? And I think if you dig down into the experts, the biomechanics, the University of Calgary has done some great studies, and I think ultimately a shoe has never been directly correlated to an injury, right? And not because a study hasn't been done. It's just it's the repetition of the movement of your anatomy that's going to cause an injury, right? Of course, if you're in a shoe that is probably putting you out of line or such, that can certainly lead to that. But certainly, depending on a shoe, depending on your body, depending on your gait, all these things, obviously we know that runners get hurt. There's stats that say 40 to 70% of runners suffer injuries. And speaking honestly, I have some runner's knee tendonitis right now that I'm trying to deal with. So, the one thing that we do know is that that the runners are honest, and they'll say, hey, this doesn't feel good, and I think my only advice to that is, like, as wearing running shoes is certainly, and I'll get to this in a second, is to rotate your shoes and also listen to your body and know the difference between soreness and pain, things like that, right? And don't let anything go that keeps hurting. There's ways to avoid some of that stuff. But also you have to be smart about it too. Like this one study I have on top here is there has been suggestion that wearing carbon fiber plated shoes too often can lead to certain problems and everything else. So all I tell runners is certainly be careful and be aware of what you're doing. But again, having a quiver of shoes. And here's my quiver of shoes, or one of my sections of it. This is a photo I took about an hour and a half ago, I think, in my garage. And those are kind of the shoes that, not necessarily in my rotation, but I'm kind of aware of what I wear when I go out the door for a run or trail run or whatever. But based on the experts I've talked to, obviously the biomechanists, I have a good friend, Jay DeSherry, who's a really good PT and really good gait analyst, based out of Portland. I'm sorry, Bend, Oregon. So these are some of the things that I've heard repeatedly. And so, rotate your shoes, strengthen your legs, do those drills, moderation in all your shoe choices. What does that mean? It's like, I always tell people running is never just running. If you want to be a good runner, an efficient runner, a good marathoner, we've got to do those, those drills that enhance your form, enhance your strength. Running, just purely running, going out the door and running, it's healthy to a point, but also it's also it breaks you down, right? And so you got to do those things to optimize your form and your movement. A quiver of shoes, as I've said from the stop, is certainly a good thing to have, not because you want to spend more money on shoes. Pardon me, my dogs are going to bark here. Sorry about that. But like the ability to differentiate your foot placement and your gait, alter your lower extremity muscle recruitment. Basically, every single road shoe you're on the roads for, will help you move slightly differently. We know that road running is running on bike paths is very repetitious, and so running on trails can help that because you can mix up your gait a little bit and confuse your muscle recruitment, which is a good thing, and not have the exact same movement, which can lead to, based on your anatomy, based on your health, based on all these things, lead to those overuse injuries on the previous page. Let's see what else here. The benefit, obviously, of having a shoe quiver is that your shoe longevity is increased. Obviously, if you have two pairs, you're wearing, one every other day. That's a very simple way of doing it. If you have different shoes for different workouts, your long run shoes, your workout shoes, your speed shoes, your recovery shoes, you might buy, one or two pairs a year, but you have those over the course of time. You can get more miles out of them and such. The biggest thing for me, though, has always been, as a faster runner when I was younger, I always loved racing flats which don't really exist anymore, but like racing flats were low to the ground, allowed your foot to feel the ground very well and really kind of push off and really kind of control your gait and your pace. Yeah, that's kind of muted now with maximal shoes, and there's pros and cons to that. Obviously, maximal shoes can be very comfortable and very soft and everything else, but in my opinion, you're also losing a lot of that proprioceptive kind of connection to the ground. So, which I think is an important part of running. Anyway, definitely, also, like, I always tell people, like, be careful washing your shoes in a washer, but don't put them in a dryer ever. Don't wear your running shoes you normally wear to mow the lawn or even to do errands in, because you're going to break them down in different ways. The walking gait or doing errands. I mean, like, you're not going to get the same longevity or kind of consistency out of your shoes if you're using for a bunch of other things. See here. Okay, so this is the big part here. Like, again, I'm a big proponent of local running stores. This is the Naperville Running Company outside Chicago. Twice voted the best store in the country. Why are they the best? I don't know if it's bleeding off or not. But anyway, why are they the best? Because they have great customer service. They also have a wide variety of shoes. They have great shoe testers or shoe fitters. And I think those things are essential. I think that even as a shoe geek like myself, it's always important to understand how each shoe fits my own feet. And that's why, I mean, fit is the most important thing, right? We all have a different length of our feet. And some of us, like me, have different, like, by a quarter size different. So shoes always fit differently. Also, the volume and shape of your feet are super crucial to finding a good shoe that fits you well. All companies use different, basically the thing a shoe is made around is called a last. And basically that's basically the volume shape of the shoe, but they're always different. And there's no rhyme or reason why they're different, but every brand, every factory winds up creating different size shoes. I'm a 10 and a half, and I wear 10 and a half in most things. But again, I have narrow feet, I have low volume feet, I have very stiff feet. And so knowing all that helps me understand when I put a shoe on and wear test it on the sidewalk outside the store or on the treadmill. Shows me how much different all shoes are. So I think those things are all important. I always tell people not to shop by color or brand or even by reviews or social media buzz. I mean, everyone, like, I want the shoes that Kipchoge's got, right? And of course we do, right? We all want to run 201, 202. But I think that, like, if you block your mind out for a bit of not, like, you might have been a New Balance person or a Nike person or a Puma person all your life. I think when you go into the store, you can have an open mind and probably see some new things and maybe realize, oh, this fits me so well. This feels so good, right? And so I think those things are important. I say that, and yet I do know that if you look at the data, a lot of people do buy their shoes by color or brand, and so not entirely wrong, but certainly if you go into your local running shop, you can have a different experience maybe. People ask me how do they test racing shoes? So for marathons, obviously there's a lot of unique carbon fiber plated shoes, or even, shoes that don't have plates that have a lot of good, responsive foam in them. That's a tough thing to do because you can't simulate that speed you're running with, the fatigue you're running with, and also the form breakdown that you get after, say, mile 18 or 20 of a marathon. And so it's a really tough thing to do. It comes back to me that fit is essential, right? First you got to have that shoe fit you very well. And again, like, you can't go in with headstrong and say, oh, I really want the Nike Vaporfly 4, because that's what everyone, you got to understand how it fits first. And then, you can do your best to test that out in various ways. I know a lot of running stores will offer like a 30-day return policy, things like that. That works out very well. And ultimately, the hard thing about those high-end expensive shoes is it's really hard to figure that out and test, and like there's so many shoes out there, and each one of those super shoes runs differently and feels differently. And they're probably all obviously light and fast, but the minor differences will lead to different instabilities in your own gait, and will accentuate things in different ways. And so I don't want to leave you hanging there, but I think certainly going into your local running shop is a good like first start, and like trying to get them on your feet first is a good first start. As far as trail shoes, I always tell people that trail shoes depends on where you live and what kind of trails there are. I live in Colorado, so there's a lot of dirt trails, rocky trails, and ultimately sandy trails. Even in the springtime, there's not a lot of muddy trails, right? I know in New England, upper Midwest, there's a lot of muddy trails, right? And so that will determine kind of if you need a big lug in your outsole, what kind of stability you want, things like that. And so trail shoes are a different beast in themselves. And if you recall that photo I showed of my garage and my shoe stash, when I run different trails here, I'll think of like, okay, I want a different shoe for that specific trail, right? Because we have trails that are all rock or all dirt, and so I think that's if you have that ability to at least vary your shoe relative to that, that's important as well. But I do think going to your local running store to understand the fit and how your foot interacts with certain brands is super important. All right, people always ask me what my favorite shoes are. I don't really have favorites. I have been in so many shoes, and I probably wear 5 or 6 different new pair of shoes a week, and that's not a joke. That's real. That's a fun problem to have. But backing up, two of my favorite shoes from my long time ago was the Nike Air Edge, which was a super fast light shoe, which actually strangely enough had 2 different color swooshes, and then also the Nike Air Tupu, which was a really good trail shoe back in the early 2000s. That said, I'm not a Nike apologist. I like some Nike shoes. I don't like some other ones. I try to be brand agnostic, both in what I do professionally, but also for myself, because I want to, certainly get the shoes that work for me. Here are some of the new ones. These 6 shoes here are these all in the last 2 years have been the ones I really liked a lot. Certainly they're different levels of foam and different materials. The Norda shoe is an interesting shoe. Norda is a small company in Canada that uses really high-end materials, good foams. This material called Dyneema for their upper, and so every shoe nowadays has so many special features on it. You really have to understand, as you climb that ladder, if that's what you want to do of top tier shoes, you're going to see different things. The best part is that most brands are using a lot of very good materials. There are no what I call dog shoes anymore, and I say that gently, but in reality, because if you've been running for a long time, you recall some of your shoes that were not very good and like just like felt flat or just didn't feel great, and there was plenty of shoes I've run in that have been that way. But I think certainly in the last 10 years, there's been such an advance in materials that are better than what EVA was. We have a much better kind of underfoot sensation now, and so there are a lot of brands doing a lot of really cool things. There aren't many brands that aren't making the grade. There are a lot of brands that are just doing things really well. So these are some of the newest ones that are, again, they vary in height and foam and responsiveness and kind of purpose too. And so you've got to really kind of feel kind of what what your foot feels like. I think that whole foot to brain kind of connection, I think, is something you learn. No different than when you're, maybe a young kid and you understand, grabbing something hot or grabbing something cold, or the whole notion of how you turn a doorknob or do dynamic movements with a screwdriver, things like that. I do believe that there's a foot to brain connection that really kind of if you let it happen and kind of are in a lot of running shoes, can really kind of influence and inform kind of what is good for you. It's a good start. There was certainly I mentioned the University of Calgary before. There was a biomechanist named Ben O'Nig who did a lot of the advanced early research through the 2010s before he retired. But one of the studies he did was he tested all these runners in running shoes, and what he came back with was that one of the first indicators of what shoe is good for you is the one you like, right? And that sounds super simple, but I do believe it's tied to that foot to brain connection, right? We've all been in shoes that like, oh, this feels weird. I don't what is this, right? And yet we've also been in shoes like, I love this shoe, right? And it's probably not because it's blue or because it's got this logo on it. It's because you feel good when you run. So I really think there's a lot to that. And that study kind of at least put some science or some data behind it. That's me in Chamonix, France, running on one of my favorite trails, which is way up high, but is not as extreme as it looks. And I'm wearing a pair of Salomon. I can't remember what Salomons they were there, but anyway, that's the gist of my presentation. But I'm happy to and eager to answer questions. I think that's certainly going to be the more more detailed portion of this. I think you all have different backgrounds in running, and I'd love to hear from you of what your experiences are, what you like, what you don't like, things like that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian.
Yeah, yeah. Does anybody have a favorite shoe? And there are no wrong answers here, but if you have a favorite shoe, we could talk about shoes forever, but obviously they're all personal preference.
I would say EVOSL has just been like when I put that shoe on it, I just have fun in it. I mean,
Yeah,
I
right.
can run fast in it and really enjoy it.
That's that shoe on the bottom there, and like
Yeah.
that's a unique. It's lightweight. It's a really good responsive foam. Doesn't have a plate, and it's fairly simple. It's almost I actually drawing back the lines to some shoes. I actually the Saucony Kinvara was a shoe that had some of the same characteristics. It wasn't an advanced foam back then, but it was a lightweight shoe that felt good underfoot with simplicity, right? And I think that's actually what the Evo SL is. It's fairly simple, but it's very good at what it does. And I agree that it's fun. I mean, and that's the best thing you can say about a shoe sometimes in a review or your own personal remark. Oh, the shoe is fun. I like it, right?
Yeah. The lockdown on that shoe is on the original is not great. I know they came out with the update. Is the update much better or
The
not?
update is better. I found that to be a pretty wide shoe also. And so it was a shoe that I had to torque my laces down, which I don't always like to do, or
Hmm.
I don't always have a great result when I kind of experience that. But the original, like I said, I have narrow feet, but I actually was able to torque that down. It felt okay, but they have improved that for the second version. But that's the thing too. Like that's a shoe that came in one width. And I know that like in tracks especially, has written about wide feet. That's a thing that is hard to judge relative to if a brand comes out like, oh, it's our medium width shoe, right? And obviously, New Balance is one of the brands that has multiple widths in a lot of shoes, which is good. That's one way of doing it. The challenge though is that when there's a shoe with one width, um, that can be a different experience entirely for this runner versus this runner.
Hey Brian, could we hang there for a minute because the mount to coast caught my attention. We have another running store here that's been carrying it. I've never pulled the trigger and gotten it, but I remember when that came out, a buddy of mine was like, "Hey, have you heard of this?" I was like, "No, I've never heard of this." Could you? I think they're pretty new. Could you talk a little bit about Mount to Coast?
Yeah, so Mount to Coast came out about 2.5 years ago, and they've done a lot of different innovative things. One of which is some of their foams are using a lot of biomaterials, so castor bean derivatives, or one has I believe, and I'll say this lightly, is some kind of bio waste material, an offshoot from an agricultural
Mhm.
process, and they've found with those biomaterials, they've actually still had the same kind of performance results with some of the modern petroleum-based foams, right? And so maybe that's neither here nor there to anyone, but obviously it shows that brands are innovating and using different brands. There are different materials, different ways of creating shoes. Mount Coast initially came out and said they were, for ultra running, and that was kind of curious to me because the ultra running market isn't very big. Certainly, ultra runners want good shoes too. But I found this shoe, that the H1, which is they call it a gravel shoe, which has a light a light trail outsole, and obviously a very thick midsole, but very cushioned, but also very responsive. And to me, a great fitting upper. With one of the key things is they have kind of a dual lacing system where they have a pull cord in the front of the foot, and then they have a lacing system, for the typical saddle. And so things like that, allowing different types of kind of fit techniques, I think is pretty cool too. And so this shoe I've worn a lot on like when I go not necessarily trail, although some trail, but like some gravel road. If I do a run around Boulder where I wind up on bike paths and a little bit of trail, a little bit of gravel road, that's kind of a great mix for that. But I think Mount Coast is really kind of on the kind of leading edge of some of these young new companies that are pushing innovation. And to that point, there's a lot of new brands coming into the space. There's a brand called Kip Run, which is a French brand, which is a subsidiary of there's a big French sporting goods company called Decathlon. It's a huge company, and they're all over Europe with their retail stores. They do camping equipment and then jackets and all kinds of stuff. And the running brand is called Kip Run, which is kind of literally the essence of keep run, right? And so, but their shoes are coming out, and they have both road and trail shoes, and they're really good as well. There's a brand from China. There's a lot of big Chinese brands that are doing things really well, and the Chinese running market is enormous. To the point that I've had people at U.S. brands we see for these shoes like saying, "Oh, we're going to sell more shoes in China than we'll sell in the U.S. by far," right? That's not a bad thing. On the other side of that, a lot of those Chinese brands are coming here, right? And that's not a bad thing either. It comes down to what you like and what works well for you. But Anta is a big Chinese brand that just actually purchased Puma on the DL, and so that's probably going to be one of the ways they get into the space. The challenge with being in the United States, if you're not already here, is getting on the shoe walls of running stores, right? Certainly anybody can put up a website and sell, direct to consumer e-commerce, but you also need to be in the running space. You need credibility from the running community, which really comes from the core of local running shops. So it'll be an interesting thing in the next couple of years as some of these brands from other places come in here, and again, certainly like Hoka and Nike are selling a lot of shoes in the new market of Southeast Asia. So it's interesting. I was just in a race over in Hong Kong. I ran a 35K trail race, and it's fascinating to see, all the, some of our favorite shoes that we would all wear are certainly over there as well. And it's just, it's like we're a small world, right? And I don't want to be naive and suggest that like that's a foreign land way far away. But we see our running space typically who based on what's on the feet of your people you run with, right? What's on when you go to your local 10K, what's everyone wearing, right? And so that's I think that'll subtly but dramatically change in the coming years.
Brian, as a runner in my 60s, I'm curious, is there any either foam or study that shows that certain foams and or certain stack heights or things like or certain shoes in particular reduce injuries?
There's been some attempts at that to kind of put a wrapper on that. It's hard though because the variables between again foot size and shape, your gait patterns, your own subtle movements of instability are so varying and so different. Honestly, you could say you could put a shoe box on your foot and run, and you might get injuries, you might not. And I don't say that facetiously. I did ask one of the professors that did the sub-4 study at the University of Colorado, physicist, basically like, what's your take on the high stack foams and everything else? And his answer was, you could put a feather under your feet, you could put big foam under your feet, you could put cinder blocks under your feet, and you could correlate data, and you'd probably have the same spikes of injury versus not, right? And obviously, cinder blocks or feathers are, as being facetious, but I think the point of that is like we're also crazy different in kind of how we move, right? Even though we do all move in the same human manner. I think Brooks tried to put a spin on that to say that we all have our own preferred movement pattern, right? Which is probably true, right? And we can also slightly improve our own movement patterns by doing drills, by strengthening where we're weak. I think that like one of the new innovations of the last 10 years is you can go to Fleet Feet or certain other stores that have proprietary foot scanning technology and then also foot movement technology. If you go to a higher end lab, you can get a lot of that, with IMU sensors on your body and see how you move. But at a very basic level, you can do it at running stores, a lot of good running stores now. And can that tell you definitively what's better for you? Maybe, maybe not. It can certainly show where there's differences, and like, I can understand where, my feet move differently and I'm stronger on my right side than my left side, which is everyone's got strength on a different side, right? Very few of us are symmetrical in our strength and anatomy. I mean, even like the length of our bones. And so there's so many aspects of that. The simple answer is no. There's been attempts at that, but it's just so hard to kind of pinpoint that. And again, the injuries, the overuse injuries that we talked about earlier on that list are so varying, and it's never one variable that causes, IT band syndrome or like, I have this runner's knee scenario right now that I only worsened because I went to Hong Kong to do this race. It only came up, in early January, and I knew in 15 days I was going to Hong Kong. I'm like, I can't not go to Hong Kong. I can't not run the race. And so I worsened it by doing that. And now I'm thinking back to, gosh, how did it start, right? And I don't have an answer for that either, because I look back at the shoes I ran on certain days, and I ran in, a dozen different shoes over, 2 weeks, and so, I don't want to say it's a great big mystery, but obviously that's kind of where we are with running shoes. I mean, we have all these great foams, and the foams do things better than they used to, and they're lighter and they're more responsive. And yet, it's kind of how we are moving in that. And backing up to my own scenario, I was pretty aerobically fit going into that race, and yet I was probably leg weak, and not as strong as I could have been on leg wise, and I hadn't come off of a full season because of other injuries and things, and like I just hadn't come off a full season where I was like, marathon fit and doing all my strides and everything else. And so yeah, I don't blame it on the shoes, because I wouldn't even know what shoe to blame it on. And also, I know that I could have been doing more, right? So that's for me motivation to keep going. But also, since that time, I've started a whole new series of streaks of push-ups and sit-ups and all that stuff and drills. And so anyway,
Okay.
Susan, did you have something?
I was wondering about the carbon plates and running. I have pretty much done the marathons in a cushioned shoe, and I got a plated shoe, the Saucony, the Endorphin Pro, I think.
bro, yep.
And did a 10K in it, and I was just flying. But I have some concern about, the distance of the marathon in the shoe and kind of that bone stress.
Yeah.
Being someone in their 60s as well. And I do love the Evo SL. That's my other favorite.
Yeah, I guess my answer to that is I'm with you. I think certainly the biggest thing that I can say about carbon plated shoes is they all are distinctly different. If because while the foams might be similar, some of the plates, a lot of the plates have vastly different shapes, different arcs, and curvature,
Yeah.
and also how your gait reacts to that or interacts with that. I think like the navicular bone stress has been something that's been repeated, which is why they did a study about that, but also various Achilles and calf soreness or overuse injuries have been a common. If you look at various internet threads or social media threads, that come up. And like, the one thing I'll say is we all, when I was at my fittest, I could run a marathon, and if I didn't hit the wall too badly from a fueling problem, which is different, but at mile 22, I could keep my form generally through the finish, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the last time I ran in Chicago, I think I ran 3:30, and but I had more form breakdown and everything else, and so there's so many variables, and certainly the fueling aspect of the marathon. The reason people hit the wall mostly is because of fueling, but then it also makes you fatigued, and then therefore your form falls apart, right? And how does that fit with a carbon fiber plated shoe? If if you're, in a shoe where that propulsion is kind of mechanical and kind of automatic, and your body is less has less ability to, from a muscular point of view to engage with that, then all of a sudden your form is changing dramatically, and then in theory your instability is increasing exponentially in the last like 6 miles of a marathon, right? That's not to say you shouldn't use that. I think certainly, referring to my friend Jay DeSherry, he'll say like, transition slowly and smartly, and like, run a half marathon in those shoes,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
and do a long run. I mean, I think it's a fine balance. To carbon plated shoes feel so good and feel so poppy and so energetic. And I myself actually wore them too many days in a row, a couple of years ago, because of laziness or greed and everything else. And I felt so good. But then I, wanted to get really sore into my left foot, and it didn't go away for several weeks. And so I think that it's a hard balance. It's a fine balance. I think even elite athletes probably deal with these things at some level, from what I've heard around some of the athletes in boulders. So I don't really have a good answer for you, except for I will say that there's plenty of reasons to to run a marathon in a milder. I mean, even like the Saucony Endorphin Speed, which has a nylon plate, a little bit more flexible. I think that like you won't get the top end speed or efficiency, perhaps.
Yeah.
And I'm only speaking kind of anecdotally, not like from a science point of view. But you also, at the back end of that, you won't, those last 6 to 10 miles, it won't feel as sharp and awkward.
Right.
And so.
Right.
It's a tough thing. I think that carbon fiber plated shoes have been a wonder in terms of improving performance, and there's probably more athletes at the elite end that are willing to admit that they probably hurt themselves from carbon plated shoes. And so, are there benefits? Absolutely. Can they be good for you as a marathoner? Absolutely. And should you be careful about them and kind of listen to your body and definitely be slow in transition? Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. I do wear the nylon plate. I've done probably 8 marathons in those, so I was like, well, maybe I should make the step. And all kinds of friends, I run with say, you're crazy not to do it.
Yeah, I mean, like again, you're listening to your body and that whole foot to kind of brain connection. I think I ran the Boulder kind of. I was kind of half as fit as I wanted to be, but I ran the Boulder 10K a couple years ago in a pair of I don't know if it was the Nike Vaporfly or the other one, but at like 4 miles, I was like, I shouldn't be wearing these, right? And if only because I could feel like the extreme bounce in the movement of my foot, and as I was like, going up a certain hill or going down a hill, I was like, okay, like, and I'm in like, days after that, I was super sore from the modulation of my hips and from the, lateral knee movement,
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, good point. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Trax, what's your favorite shoe, Trax?
I am training in the Hoka Mach right now, and I think that has a PIBA plate, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
So I really like it because it's light and snappy, but also because Hoka has the wide option, which I need. Like I can never wear Adidas because they're too narrow. But then when I race, I've been using the New Balance Super Comp Elite, and I like that a lot.
Yep.
'Cause
Which also comes in widths.
yeah, exactly. I mean,
Yep.
that's really important for me, but to your brain foot connection, it feels really good when I put it on. So that one's been really sort of my go-to lately. But I will try anything. I will. So
The one thing I can't, obviously the super shoes have a different feel and function and different sharpness of kind of foot movement based on the plate, but also like every single shoe out there, every different iteration of foam also feels different, right? There's some that are more cushioning, and shock absorbing, and then there's some that are more bouncy and responsive. But with that comes maybe some level of instability versus stability, right? On how much you might like me, like a bouncy shoe, right? It's sometimes for some of your runs, for your tempo runs, for the midweek runs, but also knowing that like how your foot is landing and how the rest of your kinematic chain is moving, right? If your knees are not tracking straight and they're wobbling more, that's going to lead to other things. I kind of realized on my own in 2018, I ran Leadville 100, and I was mostly running in speed goats all year. And I like the speed goat. This isn't even a knock against the speed goat, but I realized somewhere deep in that race, I was like, oh, I can feel like the angst of my knees going back and forth, right? And so literally at the last aid station at mile 87, I changed into something different. I can't even remember what it was, but something more low to the ground, something more balanced, something a little bit more firm, And then I actually felt better, right? And so it's there's no exact science to running shoe fit and kind of what's best for you, but there is a way. It's more of an art, right? You can figure it out in some ways. Sometimes it's too late, but sometimes, in the nick of time that you like, But again, I do think it's the notion that that the Ben O'Nig study, like what feels good to you is a good first start, right? Because it comes down to how your foot fits in the shoe, which I think is important, and kind of how you control your gait. So.
Awesome. Anybody else?
I've got one more. Brian, I have Nova Blast 5 and Mega Blast. Recently added Mega Blast to my quiver. Where does Super Blast 3 fit in?
Oh my God, this blast line is ridiculous. I cannot keep track of the situation with the blast.
So it's funny in talking to those ASICS guys about the Super Blast 3. They kind of admitted that they have too many SKUs, meaning they have too many shoes in their line, right? Because it's confusing to people that they want some level of balance. And I got to think about that for a second. But let's see. So because there's actually two more. There's also the Sonic Blast, and then and so I don't know if I can recite that off the top of my head because they have a level of they call it cushion response, and then also like energetic response, and it's like such a spectrum that it's almost like again they admitted without maybe not publicly admitting, but they have too many slices of the spectrum, right? And so it's a good question. And you got me on the spot, but because there's so many different shoes, and I haven't I've been in the Super Blast recently, the Sonic Blast, and there's one more too. There's one more that you didn't mention, I think. So. But that's how confusing it can be, right? In that there is a need, or there is the ability to use a different shoe like that for a different type of run, right? Depending on how fast you want to run, depending on how comfortable you want to be, all these things. But at the same time, are we better now that we have 7 or 8 different shoe options from every brand versus in 2000 or 1990, where there was there was two shoes you could choose from, right? And it wasn't that simple, but it was certainly much simpler because most of the foams were almost identical.
Yeah.
I don't know, Brian. If you talk to ASICS, let them know. I tried to pull that up and use like a key to look at which one to choose, and I ended up just completely closing everything down and deciding I'm not trying any of them because it was too overwhelming.
Yeah, it's and even I think between reading reviews or even going to stores doesn't really help that much either, because you look at a shoe wall and you think you're seeing what you, oh, I want that one, but then oh, what's that one? And
Right.
there's always something that's bigger and foamier, and then the foam properties are slightly different, but also different, right? And so it's a tough mix, and that's not to leave this with a conflated message, but honestly, I do think that starting the running shoe stores is probably a good help, at least because you can feel that you can feel the difference, and I think that sometimes brands in their marketing use the same kind of language for everything and just subtly different, right? And for example, like the ASICS, everything's a blast, right? Well, which blast is that? There's so many different foams that have new names and everything else, and the marketing terms can be dizzying, So
Yeah.
does anybody have any races on the schedule they want to talk about?
I have 2. I've got Boston and then London a week later. So
Wow.
shoes I'm
Nice.
really worried about, which ones
the
I'm
double,
going.
Nice.
the transatlantic double. That's good for you. That's exciting.
That's awesome, Susan. Congrats.
Oh,
Yeah.
thanks. We'll see how it goes. It might be a bad mistake, but
You'll do great.
Yeah,
I love
yeah.
it.
How'd you get into London?
a tour program. I
Okay.
didn't get in the lottery.
Yeah.
There's 3 ways into London. It's the lottery, which is hard.
Yeah.
It's the tour programs, or I've heard that if you join the Serpent Swim Club, you can get in that way. But don't
What's
tell anyone that.
the name of it?
It's called the London Serpent Swim Club, and you got to keep that quiet. You can definitely pursue it yourself, but that's how my friend Mike Wardian got in when he was doing multiple marathons like that. So there's usually a back door to every race, except for Tokyo, which is near impossible to get in.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll check that out.
Yeah, so Susan, you may want to wear the carbon for one, and then more of a little bit more support for your London.
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot of cushion. I'm thinking for London.
Yeah.
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 Nice to
Yeah.
have options though.
Yeah. It is nice to have options.
As soon as my knee gets better, which will be soon, I'll be running. I'm running the Collegiate Peaks 25 miler in Buena Vista, Colorado.
Wow.
It's a 25-mile trail race. It's not. I mean, certainly it's hard. It's got elevation, but it's a relatively runnable trail race. Kind of flowy trails, and then the last part of it, the last 6 or 8 miles, finishes on an old abandoned railway grade, so it's flat and dirt and everything else. So
Nice.
Hmm.
Gentle
So-
on the legs.
Brian, I'm sure somebody's asked you this before, but what is your absolute most comfortable running shoe, period?
of all time, or
Or that's out now.
it's probably one on this screen. I mean, I think certainly the Norda feels really good. The Mount Coast is a really good shoe. For me, I like the Super Blast, but it's a little bit much. I mean, it's I think it's improved from the Super Blast 1 and 2, but I think the Super Blast 3 is still a lot of foam. I'm not an anti-maximalist guy. I wear maximal shoes some of the time, but not all the time. I like to feel the ground. I do think that the Evo SL, if it were slightly narrow, that would be like an all-time shoe. I think that's a good one. I'm trying to think what else I have. There's a new Mount Coast kind of like tempo running shoe that I have that's pretty good. Yeah, I mean, like this gets back to the question people say, what's your favorite shoe, or what are you running in now? And I don't have ever that answer because I literally run in so many shoes every week, So, and here's one that I've had out once. This is probably the trail version, the light trail version of the Evo SL, which I think is called the Adizero Evo SL ATR, which is all terrain, I think. So I don't know if you can see that. That's
Wow.
it has a light. I'm not sure if that's coming through, but it's got a light tread. So it's a version of that. It's not identical. Every time a brand makes a road shoe into a trail shoe, there's always differences. It's never like the same kind of feel, but it has some of the same qualities. So, but I think if there's an all-time shoe that I like over say like the last 10 years, I do think that the Saucony Endorphin Speeds have been really. I put a lot of miles in those. I put a lot of miles in a lot of shoes, but I think that one I keep coming back to. I think I've liked the 2 and probably the 3 the most. But I've also had a good experience up with the 5 too. So it's funny how those things go. When the Brooks Ghost first came out, some of the Brooks shoe team was in Boulder to meet with the Boulder Running Company, and I got a chance to go out and run with them. It was like still a prototype, and we ran it. And the Brooks Ghost now is a very cushy kind of I would say well-appointed shoe, right? And when it first came out, and this is in 2009, 10, it was much more low to the ground and had much more kind of a semi-firm feeling, and but very quickly they changed it. They needed another shoe in their line, and when it came out, they thought they heard back there was good qualities to it, but they needed to be more accessible to a wider range of runners. So very quickly that became a much cushier and bigger shoe in a lot of ways, and that's just how shoes evolve for better or for worse, And so it's always interesting to one of the biggest ones of all time I think was, and this is dating myself, but in 2004 or so, the Asics DS Trainer, which was a popular kind of racing training fast training shoe, was out, and Asics completely changed it the next year, and they got so much flack. This is early internet, before social media, and it blew up on them, and they had to wind up reverting back to that previous version the next year. So brands definitely listen to what's going on, and obviously the bean counters especially do, because they want to see what sales are. But shoes evolve again, like I said at the top of this, because the planned obsolescence of a model is tied to we all wear out shoes, and we're not going to because runners want new and better things, or next year's model, there's that excitement of just like an iPhone. It's like you don't want the iPhone you had in 2017, even though that was effective. You want obviously all the new tech and all the new stuff. And so the good part is that there actually is new materials and new kind of designs and new kind of ways to fabricate a shoe that make the shoes better. Sadly, there's also higher shipping costs and everything else. So when you see your favorite shoe go from 140 to 150, that's part of it too. And without being political, obviously the tariffs are not helping runners either, because all the shoes are made. Most of the shoes are made in Vietnam. There's some made in China. In other places, there are very few shoes made in the U.S. New Balance has 5 factories in New England, and they make shoes, although they don't make their high-end running shoes in those factories. So that will be the whole conversation to have in 2 to 5 years when we look at prices of shoes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I will say one last thing about like maybe shoe factories. It's interesting, when people think of shoe factories, a factory in general, you think of like a mechanized thing where a car is being made, and like that doesn't exist in running and in running shoes. And without getting too deep into, I know that a lot of brands have gotten in trouble for less than human conditions in shoe factories. I do think that has improved quite a bit immensely since like the early 2000s. I've been in 2 shoe factories, and certainly have seen normal working conditions and things like that. And I can't speak to that politically or socially, but having witnessed shoes being made, like I watched a couple different brands. The conveyor belt, the assembly line, literally is like 100 to 104 people picking up a shoe and doing their role with it, right? It might be gluing a piece together. It might be picking up an outsole and gluing it to the midsole and putting it on back on the conveyor. It goes into a heating thing where it goes through the heat sealant, and then somebody else picks it up and does something else with it. And so, I watched that happen. It was fascinating, and like literally no short of any 80 to 90, as many as 100 people doing something different to that shoe, right? And then for a full 9 to 5 shift, that might mean 3,200 shoes being made, right? Which seems like a lot or a little, depending on what your background is and how things are made. But like knowing that there's like say 3 million Brooks Ghosts out there, right? Any given year, take 3 million divided by 3,200, and like wow, it's a slow process to make a lot of running shoes, right? And so I always tell people that like the shoe you pick up buy at your store or you get shipped from Amazon didn't come from a factory as we know it. It's not a mechanized thing where all these machines are putting things together. It's actually human people touching all these things, and so it certainly puts a different spin on a lot of things. I think that like that shoe I mentioned, the on light spray, certainly adds some mechanization to the spraying of the upper. And then that'll be really cool. I think that certainly there'll be a lot of that happening in the future. But right now, every running shoe that we have, that we've talked about, that we've seen on the screens, are put together by humans, doing a specific task. And this is all for Asia that I've been in, but also I've been in factories in Europe as well, and in Italy and in France. And so it's the same thing. You're basically starting with all the raw materials, all the materials stacked up for whatever you are, the outsole, the laces, and everything else. There's somebody actually lacing the shoe, right? Every shoe has to be laced before it puts in the box. It's one of the last things that happens, but it's all done by human effort of touching and making these things come together.
So when a shoe's out of stock, I shouldn't get so mad anymore.
I mean, it's at some level somebody has made everything, I suppose. But I think that like certain things we've seen. I mean, maybe as a kid, I saw the assembly lines in Detroit and going, oh, that's how things are made, right? But I was somewhat surprised. And it was a reality to see like, wow, these are like, and when you lace your shoes for the first time, someone else put those laces in there, right. And there's not a machine that does that, at least not yet.
Wild.
That's really cool. I've never heard that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Anybody else?
I'll throw one more out there.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Brian, do you have any dress shoes? Number one. And then the second question to that is, if you have any dress shoes, what would you say are the most comfortable?
Okay. So first of all, one of the first things I learned when I moved to Boulder is Boulder's pretty low key on what you wear and everything else. And before the rest of the country came into like casual outdoor wear as their everyday wear, and before COVID, right? I kind of told people for the first 10 years I lived in Boulder, I wore a tie like once or twice because I went to somebody's wedding, right? And then half the people there were wearing bolo ties or something, kind of goofy and Western, right? But backing up to that, I do have dress shoes. I don't wear them often. I had, in my first early reporting days, I was wearing dress shoes and men's formal clothes to the office and everything else, and reporting on stories and such. And I do have dress shoes, certainly for weddings and formal things I go to. But the best pair of dress shoes I have is actually a pair of Cole Haans that has Nike Lunar Foam, right? Because Nike bought Cole Haan for a while. One of the ways Nike gets into different things is they buy a company and then they take it over and put their technology in it, right? When they got the NHL contract for NHL gear and skates, they bought a company for what was Bauer actually, and then they since has sold it. Like they did that in snowboarding, they did a lot of things, and so they bought Cole Haan probably 15 years ago now or so, and then they certainly had their midsole material going into those shoes, and then they sold the company. Which was probably a pure business move, but the relationship remained, and so I think you can still find like Cole Haans with the current shoes with lunar foam or some derivative of the foam that kind of comes from that relationship with Nike. So I do have a pair of Cole Haan shoes, brown wingtips with this beautiful orange midsole material that people always like, oh, are those running shoes? And so that's a good question because I'm kind of surprised that there hasn't been more of that. Certainly in men's shoes, I can't speak to women's shoes except for many women I know will say like, oh, aren't there better versions of women's, dress shoes or heels that could be more tech infused? And, I think for men's shoes, I still see my friends that work, real jobs in other cities, they're still wearing, wooden heel wingtips and everything else. And, but I also know that those people have a lot of my friends that were my track and field teammates have all their foot size has all grown a half size to a size and a half because they've been somewhat like weakened in the foot from wearing those kind of shoes, right? I wear a lot of different running shoes. I obviously go trail running. I do strength work, but I also am barefoot around the house all the time, and that includes walking stairs and like different things that I think keep my feet stronger and my arch higher. So I've worn 10 and a halfs since I was in eighth grade, right? And so, but I have almost every single friend that I ran either high school or college track with all have much larger feet, and they just don't run as much. And they I think the base level sedentary daily 9 to 5 stuff, it plays a big role in your feet and how your anatomy adjusts.
So no dress shoes, Mike.
Move to Boulder. Move to Boulder.
All of us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, this was great. Super informational.
Yeah.
We really appreciate your time, Brian.
I appreciate you guys. I appreciate your interest. I appreciate, I appreciate every runner's experience. And I know a couple of you said you were in your 60s. I'm in my 50s, so age is a number, right?
Yeah.
And I've always known, that like, running is a young person's game, right? I was very fast when I was 17 and 22 and all these things. And for me, it's the freedom of movement. It's the joy of movement. It's the core of my physicality, of my health. My dad ran the Boulder when he was 86, and that was exciting, and inspiring. And he'd tell me like, oh, I'm just out there jogging and shuffling. I'm like, man, you're moving, right? You're doing it. And so
Going after it.
to me, it's quality of life as we age, and like we're some of us who are runners, aren't going to be running marathons and trail races forever. But I think the simplicity of the half-hour run, right? The joy of that, the ability to do that is a gift. Health is wealth in that way. And I think, certainly at some point the common denominator is a running shoe, right? But I think that we all get out there hopefully and do what we were able to. And I think that that's what running, the arc of my life has had running in all stages. And it's never been solely about speed or right now at all. I enjoy it. I love it. And I just want to keep moving. So.
Yeah.
Amen.
Agreed.
Great. Well, I have a direct line to Brian, so if you guys have questions after the fact, feel free to let me know.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer other questions and everything else. And And certainly Coach Drax is an inspiration as well, because she's everything I would want to be. But maybe my body is too beat up from
Oh,
ultras and other trail races. But
stop it.
I love hearing I'm running Boston, or things like that. So I am inspired by the other runners around me. Certainly in Boulder, there's a lot of fast, super fast professional runners, but am as inspired. I always tell people this is my last thing. They're like, oh, you live in a cool place with all these professional runners, and like, okay, true, right, and triathletes and all these other things. But what I tell people, it's not, those people are visible, and you can see them around and you can know them. But to me, and this is true in Boston and plenty of other places. So I don't want to make it about Boulder, but this happens to be where I live. But it's to me, it's the inspiration you get from the general population of people who are out doing this stuff, right? You can go out on your, I tell stories like you can go out on a creek path run early after a snow, and you think you're the first one out there at 6:15 a.m. and there's footprints all over the place, right? Or you go up the Mount Sanitas, which is a local trail, and you think like, oh, I must be the only one out here, and like, there's plenty of people, neighbors and friends and all this stuff, and like, I think the excitement is that, like, if you're in those places, or even in a running community in those places, Boston or New York or wherever you live, or Chicago, you can find those people and be inspired, knowing that, like, yeah, but let's go for a run, let's do this, And so that's to me the essence of kind of being inspired by you guys, by tracks, by people that we see, and however we're doing it, we're out there having fun.
Totally.
Agreed.
Okay, well, thank you guys all for joining us, and and I'm sure you'll hear more from Brian through 6 Minute Mile and beyond, and keep asking the questions if you have them, but know that he can't give you a favorite and he never will.
Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Good night.